Hello, ladies and gentlemen. So, who was Renty? And I thought this was an interesting article and an interesting story to bring out because, I've heard so many different people act as though that they're so concerned about DOS, descendants of slaves. Well, if you are, you would want to know and you'd want to speak and elaborate on these stories like this. This woman can actually claim her lineage because she's suing Harvard. Why? Because Renty. Who was Renty? Let's find out. Who was Renty? The story of a slave whose racist photos have triggered a lawsuit against Harvard. And this is by a Joey Garrison out of USA Today. And so I wanted to read this and then I would shortly play the video, which is a very short clip. And this article is not that lengthy. There is another article that follows this. So Tamara Lanier looked at a photo for the first time, finally putting a face to a man she knew as Papa Renty. For years, she heard the stories that her late mother proudly told about their slave ancestor. Lanier promised she would one day write them down and create a family tree. And here he was, a gray haired and bare chested male, staring defiantly straight ahead in a photo known as, now, it's the Daguerreau or Daguerreau type, okay? All right. And so there's a story behind this. So it was almost like we made eye contact, Lanier said. It was an immediate feeling of kinship. Lanier described Renty, born in the Congo of Central Africa and a slave of South Carolina, as larger than life, someone respected in his community who taught other slaves how to read despite laws against it and was proud of his African roots. The photos of Renty and his daughter Delia or Delilah, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, taken in the nude in March of 1850 against their will for a Harvard University professor, are now the subject of a lawsuit that Lanier, 54 years of age, filed against Harvard this week. Good for her. Among all other things, that a lot of these schools of institution that are on the higher plane in terms of prestige could be caught up. We heard about the scandals that have happened with various universities, so that it doesn't stop there. So it goes on to say that Lanier in Connecticut, a Connecticut resident who says that she's Renty's great 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 granddaughter, has accused Harvard of a wrongful seizure of photos, profiting from them, and failing to recognize that she's Renty's direct descendant. DOS, descendant of slaves, okay? So she wants a court to order the photos be given to her family as well as unspecified monetary damages. Okay. Harvard, this is the additional article. Harvard University is now sued over allegedly profiting from what are believed to be the earliest photos of American slaves. Now, I want to kind of interject in here before I go further with this article. Most of those people that they have photos of could possibly be any one of us African American people who are not aware of who our lineage or people we're connected to is, and photos that we've not seen or heard from, or maybe we've seen it and it was displaced. Used for Harvard, okay? Photos of American slaves. Photos, to go on further, the photos were commissioned by a Louis Agassiz in 19th century Harvard. It's a biologist who had Daguerreau types of 13 slaves taken to reinforce his racist belief that white people were superior or are superior in what he believed to be superior to African Americans. The photos believed to be the earliest of African slaves or African American slaves, and now iconic images of slaves in the US are still owned by Harvard. Reparations. Let me point that out there. Lanier first part of it, that's part of it. Lanier first found them on the internet in 2011. Okay, so that wasn't that long ago. So she had been alerted by a friend, an ancestry hobbyist and owner of an ice cream shop, who she talked to at the store. She spent the next few years taping the expertise of professional genealogists, including one who has traced the lineages of Barack and Michelle Obama as well. So Lanier believes that her lengthy research has validated what her mother said for years, but what Harvard won't acknowledge, that Renty is part of her family. So basically, they're telling this woman who knows in her family that this man she has been related to or is related to, Harvard is telling her she's not. Basically, they're telling her you're not related to this person who even your family, they have known the story of this man, that you're related to him. So they've hidden a lot of things from African African people, African American people. And so they've gotten away with this. And a lot of this is perpetuated through the guise of racism. So it goes on to say that Lanier believes that her lengthy research has validated what her mother has always said for years, but Harvard won't acknowledge it. Okay, so Rennie is much a part of this woman's family lineage. I've talked to people all over the state, all over the country, all over the world, and everybody is just seemingly astonished at the discovery, Lanier has said. Everybody but Harvard. Harvard has not commented on the lawsuit as of yet. And so it goes on to say that he lived on a plantation in Columbia, South Carolina. And I was not too long out there. Renty, who Lanier said was around 65 when the Agassiz photo were taken, okay? This was back in that time, lived on a cotton plantation in Columbia, South Carolina, that was owned by Benjamin Franklin Taylor. This is where the studio was located, where Renty, Delia, and others were photographed by a man named J.T. Zeeley. Okay, so this is Lynn here. This is the photo of Renty, and there's a larger photo, and she is the great great granddaughter of Renty. And Harvard has taken a photo of her family member and used it to profit off of it based on the guise of racism, to show or prove that African American slaves were, in fact, what they felt, in fact, inferior to white people. So, although Lanier said that she has not verified details about his arrival to America, she believes Renty first entered New Orleans from Africa in the late 1700s in a Spanish slave trade ship. Okay, so he would have been about 15. So she believes he later came to South Carolina through the slave markets. So she said Renty was purchased in the early 1800s by COL or Cole Thomas Taylor. Okay. The father of Benjamin Taylor, whose family owned much of the land where Columbia, South Carolina was built, Papa Renty took the name Renty Taylor after the Civil War. It's unknown when he died. The Black African, Lanier said Renty was called the Black African when he was alive because he was born in Africa in the Congo. And it was rare for U.S. slaves by the mid 19th century to be born in Africa as opposed to the US, she said. That's why I believe they called him the Black African, she said. And I also believe that he retained so much of his African culture that he would not conform to the kind of traditional indoctrinations that there were subjugating African American slaves to at that time. So, a reader, teacher, despite anti literacy laws. So, that pretty much describes who Renty was, that he was literate. Lanier said that her mother told her that Renty learned how to read and taught others how to read with a book called Blueback Webster, okay, also known as Blueback Speller. She said that the book remained in her family for years, although it longer is, okay? So she said that the book remained in the family for years, and reading would have been risky back in that time, even dangerous for slaves because of the anti literacy laws in South Carolina and other slavery states. So Renty also read from the Bible as well, Lanier said. She said that her mother told her that Renty and others would worship in secret among only slaves after they got out of church services with their white owners. She said that they wanted to worship as they pleased, okay, as they pleased, a different way. Think about that. Lanier described Renty as a leader within the slave community who was respected, and he was just this larger than life person. So she said, even though he was short and thin physically, as shown in the Agassiz photo, 5 generations of Renties. Okay, this goes on to the generation of Renties. Lanier said that 5 generations of her family have been named Renty, beginning with the Renty who came from the Congo and lived at the Taylor Plantation in South Carolina. They were all either Renty Taylor or later Renty Thompson, she said. Her mother, Métis Thompson Lanier, died in 2010. She said that the third generation Renty migrated to Montgomery, Alabama to land owned by Benjamin Franklin Taylor. Lanier's mother, living in Alabama at the time, took part in a summer exchange problem where she traveled to the Northeast. Okay, so that's how the family ended up in Connecticut. So descendants of slave, DOS, meets descendants of slave owners, DOS, or okay, which is a whole nother phrase. So Lanier said that in 2015 she met Dr. Edmund Taylor, the great 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 grandson of Benjamin Taylor, for lunch in Columbia, South Carolina. He was 98 years old and died 2 years later. She said that they sat at a table that was hand carved by a slave from the old Taylor plantation, perhaps by one of her own ancestors. They were eating from Taylor's dishes. Okay. It was surreal for many reasons, Lanier said. Most specifically, when Dr. Taylor was speaking about Benjamin Franklin Taylor, the history of his family, I felt like I was hearing confirmation and validation of everything that my mom and had told her mom had told me from Renty's perspective. So this article originally appeared in USA Today, Who Was Renty? The Story of the Slave whose racist photos have triggered a lawsuit against Harvard. So I thought this was really interesting. So if you want to read it again to its entirety or read the additional articles that go along with it, have at it. But I think it's really interesting. It tells a big story about some of these universities. I wouldn't even say some. I know I might be really opening Pandora's box here. I feel like it's already creeping open because of the scandals at various universities of higher learning and academia. But I feel like most of the universities that were built most of the universities that even exist have a lot to do with what happened in historical content regarding slaves. And so a lot of those stories that you hear, and I'm just going to kind of reiterate it, we worked hard for ours. We earned what we have. Or, I'm tired of people criticizing me because I'm wealthy. Um, I don't know why, people are blaming us for our success. Well, a lot of these successes came off the backs of slaves and people who they lied, they cheated on people who they felt were inferior than them. And they put people to work so that they could succeed financially and economically in what is today known as America. And a lot of that were through these academic institutions of learning and through whatever means economically that they could spearhead their family legacy so that they could be wealthy. A lot of that money that people claim that they earned was not earned honestly. It was earned through slave trade and through humiliating others and making themselves feel as though that they earned what they have now have passed on to a new generation who now feels though that they earned what they have when in fact it was never earned. It was taken, it was stolen. And I know that's hard for some people to realize, and for some people they don't want to hear that and it upsets them. But if you look at the way things are, there's an uneven playing field here. There's some people that are extremely wealthy, and it's not because they somehow are magically talented or they're somehow magically superior over others. No, it's because it's a legacy of slave wealth that was handed down, just like this legacy was handed down to this woman, where her situation was she, generation wise, traced back her lineage to this person that we see now known as Renty. And they weren't done with the slave plantations. No, there was Jim Crow. They still used that as a means to create economic wealth in the housing market to, become homeowners so that they can leave that to their children, which wasn't afforded to people who are black. You were redlined out of neighborhoods so that you couldn't, have that legacy to leave on to your children and pass along. Some might have somehow gotten around it, and others weren't that fortunate. However, we have also a lot of other means of why people shut out people from a lot of like just basic institutions so that you could advance in your life and your family life if you weren't, an entertainer or performer, or if you weren't someone that can make money just out the blue, get a great 514 fortune company job or whatever. There are so many obstacles that they put before Black people so that you could not acquire wealth, that you could not acquire education, laws. So there were a lot of means to try to cripple Black people. And so using this article shows a lot. It shows a lot that there were still people trying to profit off the backs of slaves. And I'm going to play this clip. And what do you think about this? Because I don't think this stops just here. I believe there are more things that will come out about some of these universities where they've used photos, or they've used a name, or they've used something that someone out there can connect to say, hey, that's my great grandmother, that's my great 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 grandpa, or hey, that's the last name that I have. To this day, they're still using your lineage, your African heritage, to profit off the backs of slaves who now are dead and gone. But you can't you can't compete in the housing market. You can't get into those communities because you can't afford it. You've had a legacy of poverty because of what has happened to you all throughout generations and generations. And you're being told that you can't get any reparations because they have to give reparations to Native Americans, whom, let me express this before I play this clip. When they have a census that goes around, some of those same people who claim that they're from Native American heritage will not hesitate in checking that white box because they want to get that white privilege. As far as I'm concerned, and you can not like what I'm about to say, that's your reparations. What black people can check on the line, on the dotted line, and check the white space. Barack Obama, he might could do it, but they're not going to buy that. They're just going to say, "Oh, no, you're still black, you're biracial or whatever. You can't check white. You don't have any white." No. Even though you would say he's 50% maybe because the mom's white, his dad is Kenyan. But how many of these so-called people who claim that they're Native American will call themselves even Native American? You got a lot of them that won't even call themselves Native American anymore. I feel as though when you want to call yourself Native American because you want to scream racism, and then in the same tone, you'll turn around and check that white box on the census form so you can claim that white privilege, you're not really Native American. You're an imposter. You're a liar. And you can't claim sovereignty over this land because you're claiming the colonialist in it because you want to benefit from the white privilege. So you shouldn't even be thinking about reparations. But what group has not gotten any type of reparations or any notoriety or anything at all? Black people. Anyway, without further ado, I'm going to play this clip.
Ago, Harvard University supported and fostered a celebrity scientist.
I'm going to start it over.
Harvard University supported and fostered a celebrity scientist, a man named Louis Agassiz, who just at the time that Darwin was educating the rest of civilized society that we all come from the same place, Agassiz was perpetuating a different kind of science under the banner of Harvard. And Harvard supported Agassiz as he went down to a southern plantation, and he dragged two enslaved people, many more enslaved people, but the enslaved people that are the ancestors of our client, into a studio in Columbia, South Carolina, for the stated purpose of proving the inferiority of the black race. Renty was dragged into the studio, and they took the only thing that hadn't been taken yet from Renty, and that was his image, because he could not own property. 1850, Harvard has had some role in that, and they continue to keep the image and use it for profit and prestige.
This case is important because it will test the moral climate of this country and force this country to reckon with its long history of racism. And specifically, this case will force Harvard to look at their complicity as it relates to slavery, and finally answer the questions about their role, and also to acknowledge that I'm the linear descendant of Renty. And we can document that if you requested to use this image for purposes of exposing Agassiz as the original hate teacher, then Harvard will deny you access to the image. What I hope we're able to accomplish is to show the world who Renty is and tell that story.
But you want people, you get possession of this program
For everyone to see.
We want to take it on tour before it's loaned out to museums so people who are the descendants of the slaves can see it in Detroit, can see it in Oakland, can see it in St. Louis, Los Angeles, and they can learn the lesson of Renty.
So now there you have it. I'm gonna let that go. So it's commercial, but that's who Renty is, and I think people need to know more stories. I believe should come out like that. Um, the reason why I said that this article I thought was interesting because it has a lot to do with what has gone on all these years, all these decades, where a lot of times you're not told the truth, things are hidden, you're lied to as people who are black in this country of America, and you're called crazy or conspiracy theorist, or you made it up, or that's not true, or those places don't exist, or you don't know what you're talking about. And so to actually have some concrete proof that hasn't been stolen completely, where you can actually say, well, even though they are using this, they're stealing something from us and not giving us the rights to what is our family legacy. They're still profiting off the backs of slaves in this country. Everything that people are doing is still profiting off of the backs of slaves, and people who are black are not benefiting from it at all. But people who are, that's our legacy, which is a hard pill to swallow. But people whom are, they have nice homes that were passed down. They have a legacy of wealth that was passed down from generations, and they can track their ancestors from Ireland and from all of these different European countries. They can tell you great grandpa blah 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 and great this and this. Not all black people can trace all of their lineages because a lot of things were stolen or hidden from them. And so these people now are able to go to these nice universities, at least we thought they were, of high academic learning achievements. They're able to get into the housing market and compete. They're able to acquire more income for their families so they can pass it down to their grandchildren and their children's grandchildren's children. And so we always ask the question, well, how is this? Well, I think this right here is just but one of many uh, reasons, as opposed to also we learned that we have a lot of people who, through their wealth that they've acquired, money and millions of dollars, they've used that to cheat in the academic system and to pay their way or to buy a building so that their kids can go to these high prestigious universities, or they've hired people to take exams for their children, in which can some of these black people hire, expensive tutors, buy a building. No, no. But we have one of these universities who was just caught in a scandal, among many others, still profiting off the backs of slaves by using this photo. Tell me what you think about this. Thanks for listening.